welcome to this DCO panel discussion on tech diplomacy. We have 1 hour for today's session, and we will have a chance to answer your questions at the end, so feel free, please, to drop them in the Q&A section. Today, we are delving into the world of tech diplomacy. We will explore how tech is changing the way countries interact with each other and shaping the future of global cooperation. Allow me, please, to introduce myself. I'm Batuli Rifai, the Political Affairs Manager at DCO. With a passion for technology and extensive experience in global affairs, I'm honored to moderate the session today about diplomacy in the digital age, hosted by Digital Cooperation Organization. I joined the DCO 5 months ago, and I'm honored to have and witness the firsthand the dictation of DCO to foster global cooperation. With our 16 member states and the diverse pools of partners and observers, the DCO is rapidly expanding and trying to create a world where every country, business, and person has a fair opportunity to connect and prosper, alongside with our ambition to make a positive contribution to create sustainable digital economy. The DCO mission is to achieve social prosperity and growth of the digital economy by unifying efforts to advance digital transformation and promote common interest. I've got two brilliant minds joining me today, Dr. Cornelio Viola. You are an associate professor of diplomatic studies at the University of Oxford and the head of the Oxford Digital Diplomacy Research Group. You are also a lecturer at the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, while Dr. Marcos, you are professor, teaches international relations at the Vienna School of International Studies. You're also specialized in international security, diplomacy, and international orders. It's great to have both of you today, and I'm very excited to start with our first topic for the day. For myself, as someone who worked for many years in global affairs, but I'm not an expert in diplomacy, in digital or tech, but I've noticed the recent interaction between tech and development, tech and regulations, tech and international affairs, and so on. And I think it's time to explore how these connections are explained in one concept. And that will take me to our first question. What is tech diplomacy and why it is necessary?
Yeah, Batul, thank you very much. First of all, thanks a lot for your kind invitation, kind introduction. Yeah, so as good social scientists, let's perhaps start with that question, what we're actually dealing with, tech diplomacy. And before elaborating a little bit on the slide, let's be quite clear about it. So it's nothing new that technology and diplomacy interact with one another. They always have done that, and they always will do that. Yeah. If we perhaps look back a little bit, so advent of nuclear technology, then there was a lot of diplomatic activity as well, bilateral, multilateral, and so on. And that obviously had a lot to do with technology. It's just that it's in our days where we witness a digital revolution, the so-called fourth industrial revolution. The technological progress leapfrogs from one high point to the next. And it does so very, very quickly. And in this kind of situation, states try to adapt diplomacy in order to cope with this new situation. And this is what is now referred to as tech diplomacy. And it dates back actually to an idea that matured at the University of Copenhagen, so within science, within social science actually, and then became Denmark's first tech diplomacy initiative in 2017. So they had this idea that they basically follow the tech giants, so they don't just stay in Washington or in New York or so at a permanent mission or in an embassy, but it actually go to where the tech giants are. So they went to San Francisco, and over 20 states by now have followed that. And there's definitely a tendency to branch out further into other tech hubs in the world, which in very similar ways are not necessarily state capitals. So Bangalore in India is an example for that. What does tech diplomacy actually want to do? There's probably so if one wants to have a heading, then it is managing digital policy. And there are probably two elements to that. One is to try to figure out what is actually going on. So what kind of technological advancements are happening as we speak, and what kind of political implications do they have? So that is very much actually with in line with this old diplomatic task of trying to figure out what is actually happening and reporting that back to the capital. And there's, on the other hand, of course, also the attempt to influence things. So when we talk about tech giants, then obviously they're very much geared towards safeguarding the private interests, not a public interest. And this is definitely something that states have in mind in correcting and following their national interests. Another important characteristic of this tech diplomacy is what we call polylateralism. Polylateralism means that so it's not just two states, bilateral. It's not just a grouping of states, multilateral. But it is crossing the divide between state and non-state actors. And that's probably quite logical, yeah? So I started answering your question, Batu, with alluding to tech firms, tech giants, and diplomatic missions actually going there where they are. So obviously, so the Googles, the Metas, and so on of this world, they are very, very important actors in that regard. And one can, of course, question oftentimes who is more powerful, whether it's certain states or whether it is these tech companies. And yeah, to some extent, I also want to highlight, so there is probably even the fact that these diplomats go to where the tech companies is probably already signals a certain shift in power. Yeah. So they actually go where these companies are. So that already shows that they actually have plenty of power.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marcus. That's actually very interesting. From what you've mentioned, it's evident that tech diplomacy will regulate how states interact with each other, but also non-state actor, and that's very interesting, which will move us to our second topic for today. What contribution you think tech diplomacy makes to foreign policy and international cooperation?
Thank you very much, Batul, for the kind introduction and also for the invitation to speak with Professor Korpros today at your Tech Talks in the Tech Talk series. So I'm very happy to take this question because I think it's particularly important. Building on what Marcus has said before, we have to remember that diplomacy, traditionally speaking, from the moment it became institutionalized in the 15th century, been always about being able to exert influence on certain issues, on certain agendas that are particularly important for a country, for a state, in terms of foreign policy, advancing its foreign policy interest. So we have beginning a first wave, let's say, of diplomatic representation, because I think this is, as you pointed out, probably the most important aspect when we talk about diplomacy. We are dealing with new actors. Initially, representation was about state to states. After World War II, we had a different form of representation, states through international organizations. What we see nowadays, we see the rise of very powerful non-state actors, these tech companies. And some of these tech companies, not only by the level of economic or financial power, but also by their influence, rivals some of the state actors. They have power. So what it happens in this case through tech diplomacy is that you want engagement. So representation is one interesting aspect that we see nowadays, starting with the rise of the first tech ambassador, Denmark, and the others mentioned by Marcus. But now we see that there is systematic engagement with tech companies, and that is very valuable. It's valuable because it speaks for these tech companies, there is a shared position, there is authoritative position that these tech diplomats have, representing the interest of their countries in relation with these actors. And why is that important for a state? Is it important for a number of reasons? One is because it provides strategic advice to their own governments. So when the Danish tech diplomat goes to Silicon Valley or any other tech diplomat engaging with these companies, it tries to tell their own government something important. What exactly is that person telling the government? It tells something about opportunities and challenges. This is traditional mission. This has been part of the traditional mission of diplomats, but now there is something interesting new here. When we talk about opportunities, what kind of opportunities tech diplomacy or technology offers to states? Sometimes it's about investment. Sometimes it's about technologies that can actually provide a new competition internally or from an economic perspective. But there are also risks that they have to understand. And this is probably the most difficult part. As this technology evolves very fast, the risks sometimes are quite difficult to measure, to capture, and to communicate. But there is a second element, not only strategic advice, that can be through this understanding of opportunities and challenges can be sometimes put together, as some of the countries already started to do that in international technology strategies. UK has published one last year in February. But there is also opportunity for collaboration. In the same way, when traditional diplomats tries to network, try to create alliances, try to create forums in which they can communicate about certain issues. In the same way, now we see opportunities for collaboration. And we can think about that, right? Technology and security, it's an important file that has to be managed. Technology and economy, technology and development, technology and space, as we see nowadays, with space becoming quite important as well in the context of these companies. Elon Musk is probably the most clear example. So you have representation, you have a way to provide advice to your governments. You provide advice to your governments about possibilities of creating new forms of engagement. It's interesting that the Digital Cooperation Organization has been set up with this kind of objective in mind, to provide a hub, a platform for other countries to engage on these issues. But there is something else. There is a purpose behind these efforts done by tech diplomats. And the effort has to do with the idea of creating order. Governance, tech governance, it's about creating a form of order. And this is probably the most challenging part. Order and governance means what? Means institutions, means rules, means standards. And this is where we are right now, at the beginning, in which a new type of order, digital international order, is being created, new type of institutions. Remember 1945, how many institutions were developed after that period of transformation? And I think now we are at the beginning with new institutions are being created, new rules, and that's probably the most interesting part, both in terms of opportunity, but also in terms of challenges, given the divergent position of some of the countries and the geopolitical tensions that exist, that may lead probably to a fragmentation, to multiple digital international order. Hence, also the need for tech diplomats to find a way for engagement between different areas of technological collaboration. So that's, in a sense, the four types of contribution that I think are particularly important for tech diplomats at the moment to make.
Thank you so much, Dr. Piola. That's very interesting to know. I think I'm trying basically to put together the importance that Dr. Marcus has mentioned, and the opportunities you also mentioned about, and the risks that we will cover at the end of this session. But I think although like tech diplomacy, it's a recent concept, I would imagine we have now like we can show some of the cases studies about the impact of tech diplomacy, and like some of them of what lessons learned and what is impractical, I would say, from a practical experience. How did it really like impacted the digital area? So if we can have like we move to our third topic or our third question for the day of what are some interesting case studies that we can talk about today.
Well, let me start with the first one, the Trade and Technology Council. That's a very interesting example. Again, with technology and diplomacy, we continue systematically talk about things coming up, emerging, which didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. So the Trade and Technology Council is a new institution, new format of diplomatic engagement that was established by the European Union and United States in June 2021. Why was it created? Imagine the alternatives. What are the alternatives? The alternative is to do nothing. In diplomacy, you always have this option, do nothing. In that case, you basically let this kind of technological impulses to roam free and hope for the best. Another option is to basically develop national strategies, each for its own, right? EU will go there always, United States will go in a different way. And that I think, it's always an option as well. The problem with that option is that it may lead to frictions in which non-alignment between positions may add to some of the issues that already, creates friction for the transatlantic community. So what they decided, EU in June 2008, is maybe it's time to start a dialogue with the United States on tech issues. And that was the initiative that was proposed. It was accepted by the Biden administration. And what they tried to do, basically, is to develop a shared language. It's interesting in itself, a shared language about technology, about risks, about opportunities, about standards. So they have about 5 meetings so far, twice per year, one in the United States, one in Europe. They set up a number of working groups. And some of the working groups are, for instance, on AI. And it tries to provide a framework in which this kind of shared vision and shared language is developed. They discussed about risks that come with AI. EU has a particular definition of risk. United States is more risk tolerant on AI. So they try to create this kind of shared platform. Why do they want to do this? One is, this is where it becomes also interesting because there is a geopolitical dimension to this. Idea being that by creating this kind of shared standards, in a sense, it might be able to become like the first mover in which others will follow and adopt these standards. What's the future? It doesn't mean that there is no treaty emerging at the moment from this collaboration. There is no institutions to arise, and the future is also uncertain. If a second Trump administration will arise, then it's not very clear what is going to happen in terms of technological collaboration. But for you, this is important. And just as a side note, they use now this particular type of format to engage with other actors. EU, for instance, has a trade and technology meeting council set up with India, another important digital power, rising digital power. And it goes back to this direction, in this direction that I mentioned before, about creating governance, creating a new type of international order. So this is a concrete example of tech collaboration in which they start slow, developing language, share languages, objectives, vision, but there is clearly a geopolitical dimension to the whole process.
Cornelia, thanks a lot. Let me follow up with the global attempt, the Digital Global Compact. And I fully agree with Cornelia that we are in very exciting times. Yeah, so it's the question about how a future digital order is going to look like. And in parallel to the big outcome document for the Summit of the Future, there is a separate document being negotiated, the Digital Global Compact. Since the 1st of April, we have a zero draft. And so we all know the outcome may be a little different from the zero draft, but I think we have a general sense into what kind of directions this is moving. And let me highlight a few things there. First of all, about the scope of the Digital Global Compact. And I'm going to read to you how it starts, the first 3 paragraphs. Digital technologies are dramatically transforming our world. They offer immense potential benefits for the well-being and advancement of people, societies, and for our planet. They hold out the promise of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Second paragraph, then we are determined to realize these opportunities, and so on. Now note what's missing from that, because that's an interesting one. So there's everything is there about opportunities offered by the 4th Industrial Revolution. There's very little about risks, only implicitly something about risks, a digital divide. Yeah? But in that document, there's absolutely nothing about security. So there is nothing about cybersecurity. There's nothing about autonomous weapons. There's nothing about semi-autonomous weapons, and or any kind of matter of military imports in any way. What's also missing from it is any hints, actually, even at disinformation and misinformation. So that obviously, so we know that from diplomacy, so you basically try to steer clear of topics that could be contentious, and you focus on the kind of feel-good side of things. Yeah, I don't want to dismiss that. I think it is very important to talk about opportunities that the 4th Industrial Revolution offers. At the same time, I also want to caution. Yeah, so there's not much about the risks. Another cautionary note there, it's a Digital Global Compact, yeah? So it's not a convention, it's not a treaty, yeah? So there's a soft law, this is non-binding, only through very winding roads, yeah? Customary international law, something like that, eventually could become binding, or certain aspects, certain elements of it could become binding. The document distinguishes between 3 big categories, basically, that are being negotiated: objectives, principles, and commitments. And the objectives that are listed are to close digital divides, to make sure there is an inclusive, open, safe, and secure digital space, and to achieve some kind of a governance of emerging technologies. They're probably quite important objectives, yeah? None of them easy to reach. If you think about governing emerging technologies, yeah? So we say this is all a very dynamic process. So technology leapfrogs from one major new achievement to the next. Governing that is not an easy task to do. Principles. There is a lot of borrowing from existing documents. So the principles it has to be inclusive, development-focused, human rights-based, gender equal, environmentally sustainable, accessible, responsible, innovation-friendly, multi-stakeholder, forward-looking. So to some extent, if you go back in a little bit in time and you look at the World Summit outcome or so, then 2005, then that basically it's certain principles that are being listed in there, and obviously lots of other UN documents, UN General Assembly documents as well. there's an attempt to tease out the digital implications of them. Yeah. And that is quite explicit. So it's quite explicit in that zero draft now. But there are a lot of principles that pertain to digital matters, and that they should be made explicit that these principles should apply. And then there is also borrowing from existing documents from the General Assembly. There's quite a bit of a focus on commitments, so that states pledge to make certain, to do certain actions and to achieve certain goals, and these goals are supposed to be measurable. Yeah, so very similar to the Sustainable Development Goals. 2015, and by 2030, there were all kinds of goals to be accomplished, eradicate poverty, and all of that. You know about this. There's now again the attempt with the Digital Global Compact to negotiate something that would lead us to measurable outcomes. Yeah, and we'll see how the negotiations are gonna go. Yeah, I had a chat with the tech envoy of the Secretary General about this at some stage, and he was very upbeat. And the reason why he was upbeat, he thought this Digital Global Compact actually is something rather technical, is considered to be rather technical. So there's not a massive politicization of these issues. Yeah. So there's not this problem that, say, great power rivalries are gonna derail this process from the get-go. Because great powers think that they have to be on opposing sides there. But there are quite a few technical issues, and this he thought is reason for optimism. He may very well be right about that, but as I said, it comes at the expense of leaving out contentious issues, such as anything pertaining to the military, and such as anything pertaining to disinformation and misinformation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bill and Marcus. That's very interesting case studies, and I can see that we already have some tangible stuff to look at, or impact to look at. One thing that brought my attention when we talked about creating a shared language, or a shared vision. And that's very important, because when actors actually can sit together, talk to each other, and share the language or the vision, it's where they can actually identify some of the concerns they might have, or build up on what actually already exists. And I think this is what the DCO is also, Digital Cooperation Organization, is trying to do, to build that platform where people can talk to each other, share some concerns, and get like some innovative solutions in place. And that will actually take me to the third topic we will discuss for today. From this like shared language that we have right now, what kind of trends and risk we can anticipate in the field of tech diplomacy?
Indeed, Batul, and building on what Marcus said before on the Digital Compact, because Digital Compact, I have to understand, it's a first cut into these global efforts to create some order, to create a platform in which people can, states and non-state actors and other stakeholders can understand each other, can understand opportunities, can understand challenges, can understand the risk, and work together towards achieving those goals. That's the main challenge, working together. And we have to remember actually that the Digital Compact started about 5 years ago, 4 years ago. It was the first initiative. It took about 4 years to get to this point. And this kind of, given the pace of digital transformation, that's something that, it's very problematic. And speaks a little bit about this decoupling, in a sense, between the pace of digital transformation and the capacity of the global community to synchronize and to move with the same speed. One challenge that we have, it's actually decoupling. due to different geopolitical pressure, this ambition that we mentioned before, shared language, shared objectives, shared vision, which the digital compact tries to put on the table, is coming under siege. It's coming under siege because, you know, to what extent are we going to see a uniform implementation of the compact? We have to realize, as Marcus said, this is not binding. It's actually a calling for voluntary commitments. So let's hope it will go some way. There are different mechanisms built into the compact to monitor compliance, but there is a risk there that actually implementation will vary. So one element that we have to realize when we talk about tech governance is the possibility of fragmentation. Among several studies looking into this, whether there is going to be this kind of EU American type of tech order, a Chinese tech order, and something in between. And that, as Batul mentioned, creates a big opportunity for the digital cooperation organization because there are many in between. There is a need for a bridge. There is a need for organizations to come together and prevent a logic that existed, for instance, before 1989, right? Total decoupling. So one element that we have to realize at the moment is how to move together in the same step. The digital compact, I think we have to recognize it's a commendable effort, a very important one towards achieving exactly this vision. The question, of course, is always with the treaties, and it's in the fine print, how this implementation will go and how to prevent that fragmentation of digital order, which is now on the horizon. Let me also invite Marcus and
yeah, no, Cornelia, thanks a lot. This to add one more thing that Cornelia said, it's a paper of mine where I'm writing on what's going on in space at the moment. And we'll focus on docking and rendezvous standards. This sounds highly technical, and it is, and I have a co-author who helps me on the technical issues. But it's actually an important one. If you think about it, so say the International Space Station, different nations can actually go there. So the docking standards, they're compatible. And there are manuals about this. The last one is from 2022. But what is actually going to be the future of all of that? So here in Vienna, there are all kinds of debates, discussions about space, and for the most part, these discussions have been rather sleepy. Now, actually, for decades, not much has happened. And now great power competition has actually changed that quite a bit. And that is obviously also underwritten by the fourth industrial revolution. Yeah, new technologies. So suddenly you can dream of not just near space, but far space. So moving further, there are other actors. Yeah, there's SpaceX. And the important question then is, are you going to actually keep these docking and rendezvous standards? Or are they going to fall by the wayside? If they fall by the wayside, then this cooperation up there in space would be very, very seriously harmed. Yeah. So just to underline what Cornelia said, so there is a lot of geopolitics happening at the moment. There's a lot of great power competition, including rising powers. And the question is whether we can use tech as a means to foster cooperation and to actually overcome divides, or whether it's going to get even worse. I want to allude to different lenses. That's the second point on our slide, and on different lenses about what to do with technological innovation. And if you would depict that on a spectrum, then there would be something on the one hand laissez-faire, so don't regulate anything at all. And on the other hand, there would be a very strong governance mechanism that regulates things in quite a lot of detail. And when I last went to San Francisco, then eventually on the way back, I had a colleague of mine, also a political scientist, sitting next to me. And he talked to a programmer, so a very San Francisco-like communicative encounter. And my colleague then said he was American. He said, yeah, the reason why these Europeans want to regulate everything about tech is because they basically don't know anything about tech. They don't have all that much tech, but we have it. Yeah. So that's probably one lens of looking at it. Yeah. So simply let the tech companies do whatever they want. Yeah. Perhaps hope for something like the hidden hand of the market to make things right there. Increasingly, though, the understanding is that we should really regulate things. Yeah. So if I give you maybe again draw this analogy with the peaceful use of nuclear technology, then quite clearly, yeah, so that you can put that to use for the better of humankind, yeah, peaceful use. You can also destroy humankind with it, yeah. And I don't want to overdo this analogy, but probably with, say, artificial intelligence, and if we project into the future, what could still all happen, there may be something there as well, yeah? So where you say, okay, it could harm humankind immensely, or humankind could benefit immensely from it, yeah? And sticking to that example, some people then have suggested, okay, so we have an International Atomic Energy Agency, and perhaps we should have something akin to that also for artificial intelligence. Yeah. So it's basically a little bit of a technocratic approach to that. But a technocratic approach that, interestingly enough, when it came to nuclear technology, worked quite well. Yeah. If you think about it, the superpowers acquired nuclear weapons. The United States, obviously, before that, used it. 1945, and by the early 1950s, you had the IAEA in place. Yeah, so at least a few safeguards and everything around this issue. Yeah, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty took much longer. It was 1970. So finding ways to regulate AI and other issues emanating from the fourth industrial revolution, I think in my opinion, is a very important issue.
Yeah, just to continue on this idea of challenges and how to deal with this transformation and what is the role of tech diplomats in this process. I think one big issue at the moment is uncertainty. What is happening and how to make sense of this uncertainty. Is a famous concept in social science is called the Collingridge dilemma. It was proposed by an academic, David Collingridge, in the 1980s in one of his books, The Social Control of Technology. And what is interesting, I think it applies quite well to what is happening right now, the Collingridge dilemma, is that the impact of technology cannot be easily predicted at the beginning. And because it cannot be easily predicted, the demand for regulation or for assessing its impact is very low. But once the technology has become entrenched, it's more difficult at that point to change it. So that's a dilemma for many at the moment, to jump in or to wait, right? To what extent we see evolution in terms of AI, in terms of quantum technology? Shall we wait to figure out what is going on and then, move on and react to that? Or shall we try to do it from the get-go? And it's not easy. Remember, for instance, the first part of the digital transformation is social media. Everybody was very optimistic at that point. But then, by 2015, 2016, we started to be very scared of social media. And it is particular lessons that we learned in the past decade that informs our views of what is happening now with the new technologies. Now, dealing with uncertainty is not easy for the reason that Colin Rich, mentioned. The question is how to think about that. What we see, for instance, one approach in UK, for instance, was to develop new type of institutions. Alan Turing Institute in UK, for instance, an example. What is Alan Turing Institute? It's an institute that brings together academics, researchers, policymakers, companies, industry together to work on a particular type of issues to figure out as things are moving, as things are unfolding, what is going on. That's one approach. It was established by the UK a few years ago. And it informs decision-making. That's the purpose, right? In a sense, to make better use of the network, of academic network that exists in UK, to understand the possible opportunities, but also the risk that this digital transformation comes. Some of them can be sorted up, figure out. How is going to impact the labor market? AI, for instance. What kind of jobs will disappear? How to prepare for that? That's very important, no question about it. May think about, social impact. Others are more complicated, and we have to realize that some of the consequences of the digital transformation, we're going to figure them out in a few years. We don't know anything about that. These are the unknowns. And this is why tech diplomats are important in this process. When they create these networks, epistemic communities of diplomats posted in different regions, they keep an ear on the ground. They develop knowledge that is particularly useful to inform their government or to inform their international organizations. Again, with the purpose of doing this kind of activity. On the most positive side, because fundamentally I'm an optimistic person, I think it's also probably, coming from a European background, this is also possibly a new Renaissance period. What was the first Renaissance, if we think about Leonardo da Vinci and the others? It was a possibility in which you combine different fields and science at that time, art, literature. So it's a possibility in which we reimagine our societies in a novel way. So technology, yes, there is a dominant discourse because of geopolitical tension at the moment to see technology as a threat that is going to take away things from us, that is going to threaten our national security. But there is also, less discussed, this opportunity for reinventing and remodeling the way in which we engage with each other, a new Renaissance model of ideas, of concepts, of collaboration. Again, opportunities for collaboration exist, and this is part of the mandate of the tech diplomats.
Let me conclude perhaps with one more challenge of tech diplomacy, and it is basically about who the actors are, who governs all of these things that we've talked about. And if I would embrace now a laissez-faire attitude, then probably it would be the Elon Musks of this day. So it probably would be the tech companies coming up with their own rules or coming up with no rules at all. One thing that comes up over and over in these debates, including in the Zero Draft on the Digital Global Compact, is multi-stakeholder dialogues. So that means to bring different people, different stakeholders to the table. Now, who actually are these stakeholders when it comes to tech? That's a really interesting question because all of you probably who sit there now, you look at the screen, you look at the computer, so you're dependent obviously on all kinds of software. So am I when I talk to you, also hardware. You may have a phone next to you. So the digital revolution is all over you. So you're deeply, deeply embedded in that. So to some extent, we all are stakeholders in what is going on there. If we want to tease that apart, then it is probably tech companies for sure. It is states, and when it comes to states, all kind of different agencies actually. So foreign ministry, yes, science ministry, economics, finance, lots of them. And lots of them because tech and the digital revolution is simply almost all encompassing. So it goes through all kinds of different policy fields. It would be experts. It would be universities, actually. So I said that this whole tech diplomacy initiative by Denmark is actually something that was more or less designed in a university department at Copenhagen. It would be think tanks. It would definitely be NGOs and citizen diplomats. Yeah. So it's very, very far-reaching. And probably more far-reaching than we are used to. Yeah, so this is in that way then not just a digital global compact, not just something where all kinds of states come together, General Assembly, and they negotiate something. And depending on the rules of procedure, they are consensual in terms of what they negotiate or not. But it's actually many, many more actors who come to the fore. Yeah. And I think, in my opinion, the big challenge there is actually twofold. One is about dialogue. So these different people, these different groups of people, these different kinds of actors, they need to interact with one another, and they need to communicate in meaningful ways with one another. And they have to communicate about really, really difficult things. So one of the things that Cornelia just mentioned, so there are all of these new technological developments happening all the time. We're oftentimes actually not sure what the political implications of them are. The kind of, let's say, software developers who come up with this innovation, they most definitely are not clear about these political implications. So one example is Twitter or X, yeah. So those people who came up with the tool would have probably not imagined that it becomes a massive propaganda machinery over a course of just a few years. Don't want to criticize now the X too much, but that's probably one dimension of it, yeah. And so the trick there is that different kinds of actors from very, very different walks of life and being putting to use very, very different skill sets, they have to be able to talk meaningfully to one another. That's one bit. And the other one, I think, is good old compromise. So and that's, I think, very typical for diplomacy, yeah. So there's meeting in the middle. And so when it comes to the global compact, the digital global compact, then hopefully they'll be able to do so.
Thank you so much, Dr. Piola and Marcus. That's very interesting, and it's full of thoughts and full of lots of issues to discuss. I think two main things that really caught my attention. And there's also some of them in the comment section, which is to not center the debate in one continent or certain states, because I feel in particular in tech and digital field, to each state, it does has its own power, its own resources that everyone needs. So some of them will have a great infrastructure, some of them will have other resources, and to combine all of them together to come up with really like a solution or a system or a model that everyone is win-win, basically everyone is winning. This is, I think, it's a very, very strong message that tech diplomacy is sending. And also it's interesting to see that it's an evolving concept. So basically it's evolving concept, but also I think it's a flexible system from what you've mentioned. So new actors might come and have a strong presence in terms of tech diplomacy, and that's very interesting to see in the next couple of years. I think our conclusion is coming to an end. We were gonna have space now for question and answer. I think in 5 minutes. So unfortunately, we won't be able to answer all of the questions because I see we have a lot. But we'll definitely will have a chance to answer some of your questions on the email that my colleagues will send on the chat. So please feel free, if we did not answer your question during this session, to message us with your question. If you don't mind, I will start with the first question of how do you allocate Africa with respect to tech diplomacy?
I can take that one. So I just started a project that is entitled Digital Pathways to Peace in Africa. Yeah, and so I think when it comes to Africa, what's obviously really important is I mean at least two things. Yeah, one of them is making sure that we don't end up with this massive digital divide, but that Africa too can reap the benefits of the digital revolution. If one thinks about that, then there is obviously a lot of potential. So any kind of what the zero draft now of Digital Global Compact goes on and on about is very, very much applicable to Africa. Yeah. Early warning systems, for instance, yeah, if you think about, say, pastoral conflicts in the Horn of Africa, there's a lot one can do there. There's a lot one can do in terms of environmental issues. There is a lot one can do in terms of health. So there really is a lot of potential. Yeah. I think what will be important is that Africa is not just on the receiving end of this technology, but it is actually empowered to develop this technology itself. Yeah. So we have outside Nairobi, so it's sometimes called Silicon Savannah. But it is for the most part still whatever doing work that the tech companies find it easier to outsource in Kenya and relying on cheap labor there. Yeah. There could also be all kinds of more specific regulations applying to particular continents such as Africa. So to go on again with my comparison with nuclear, yeah. So Africa is a nuclear weapons-free zone. So if, let's say, and I've talked to African diplomats about it, so if there is no agreement on semi-autonomous autonomous weapon systems, then African states obviously could ban these from their continent. Whether that would work out or not in terms of implementing it is another issue. Yeah. But obviously, African states do have agency and they can regulate things. Yeah. But of course, if one explores these digital pathways towards peace, then one also has to factor in that there are also all kinds of security threats emanating from that. Yeah, and that democracies, of course, so through surveillance systems can come under even more pressure. And so it's Janus-based as the digital revolution, I think, in general is.
Just to follow up quickly on this question, which I think it applies to a few others that were asked in the Q&A part on Zoom. I think we have to realize that this digital transformation is going to create winners and losers. But we shouldn't presume that the winners and losers are the same. Like it happened. Technology could be could create a level playing field for many. Just to give an example, for instance, because I'm researching virtual reality and metaverse. The big players in the metaverse are not the Europeans, are not the Americans. It's UAE, it's Saudi Arabia, it's Korea. But at the same time, we have to realize that, while technology allows many countries to prosper and to advance their strategy, the worst thing that may happen is fragmentation. So going back to the case of Africa, what is important for Africa to realize is through collaboration, I think it might be able to prevent a situation in which this digital divide that we see with the transformation might affect them. Collaboration is critical here through the African Union. Speaking about tech diplomats, why not establish a tech diplomat office inside the African Union? That position will allow you to connect to debates. That position will allow countries to coordinate, to work together. And of course, you can leverage your influence much better in this way. So I think it's very important to avoid a situation in which this fragmentation that we see happening already may aggravate. A digital compact, as I said, it's a first cut, but I think more needs to be done here through the DCO or through dedicated offices that might evolve at the level of regional organization, African Union being one of them. So that's, in a sense, another call to action to develop a new profile for tech diplomacy within Africa, which I think is much needed, both internally in the region, but also across the world.
Thank you so much. I think in 1 minute we can answer one more question, which we already discussed, but I think it's good to have like just an answer to this question. Do you anticipate or predict that there will be like a creation of a digital foreign relation entity, or I would say an entity that unify all of tech diplomacy under it? It could be like, for example, the digital compact, or it could be like an entity that will make this role, or a state that will lead on this role.
If we are speaking about treaties, about conventions, there have been several attempts already with the Geneva Convention, Digital Geneva Convention, spearheaded, interestingly, not by a state actor, but by Microsoft. They took the lead to create, and the idea was, to create a treaty on cybersecurity. But I think time has come indeed when we create order and tech governance. This kind of institution is just a matter of time when we're going to see them emerging. And what will be interesting, who's going to sit around the table? And my prediction is going to be that we're not going to see only states. We're going to see the tech companies. There have been some proposals in the past to allow some of the big tech companies to sit in the UN Security Council. I mean, maybe is that a bridge too far at the moment? But a new type of organization, definitely in terms of stakeholders, they have power, they have influence. It makes sense for many of them. And of course, once you do that, how are we going to deal with question of accountability, transparency, democratic representation? These are key issues that we have to find new ways to harmonize and integrate in the new type of digital order that is being created.
Just one very quick thing, because I know we're running out of time.
Please go ahead.
To add to that, no, I think Cornelius' optimism is cautionary optimism is very, very warranted. Yeah. But I think what's really, really important there is it depends on diplomacy. It depends on diplomatic actors. Yeah. And diplomatic actors, they have to do diplomacy differently now from 50 years ago, 100 years ago, or something like that, because we are living in a different world. And so in that way, tech diplomacy, if done well, is an opportunity.
Thank you so much. I think we've reached to the end of our discussion today. Thank you so much, Dr. Biola and Dr. Marcus. Really very interesting discussion. I think let's keep in mind that tech diplomacy is basically an evolving topic, and we will see lots of trends that's coming in the future, and I think in the near future. So we will definitely keep our conversation going for a more interconnected world and for even more sessions on tech diplomacy, and just to have like more answer maybe like some of the questions that people have in their mind. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for the audience. Thank you everyone for your time today and for participating. And stay tuned for more exciting topic from DCO space, hopefully soon. Wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.